Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are. Thank you for joining this webinar. It's a joint webinar between us, Added Education, and LCR partners, LCR Capital partners. Today, we definitely have an exciting webinar moving forward. And yeah, we have a really great set of panelists here that can share their expertise as well and share their insights. But I think like before we start, I wanted to wait for I would say like 3 to 4 minutes just to wait for everybody to log in. And I think you know, we can just make sure that everybody gets online and then we can start. But yeah, I think definitely this webinar will be useful. Some of you are our clients already at Added Education. So for you as well, who's looking to send your kids abroad and then thinking about opportunities after that, this could be something that you guys can explore as well. So I think it'll be a useful information session. All right. I think a couple of new people has joined on the attendees. So welcome everyone who just joined. Right now we're just waiting for a bit, around 3 4 minutes for anyone else who's going to join to come online. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we have a great set of panelists here that will share a little bit about some opportunities after university for you guys as well as parents as and students too, like what kind of things that you can look forward to after college itself. So definitely a good webinar ahead of us and looking forward to sharing some really good insights and information as well with you all. We'll just wait for another 2 minutes, I think, and then we can start. And anybody who's joining in the middle, they can just kind of go through the webinar alongside with us as well. But yeah, welcome everyone. Um, we'll just start in a little bit. Okay. I think we'll just wait for 1 more minute and then we can start. Right. Yeah, I think we can just start later on. I'm sure like some more people will be joining. So yeah, welcome everyone to this tonight's session. This is a joint webinar between Added Education and LCR Capital Partners. So we wanted to give some more insights in terms of some opportunities that you guys can explore after university. There is definitely like a lot of things that you can look forward to in terms of what you can look for after graduating college and university opportunities to explore working opportunities and residential in the US as well. I think before we go into the main bulk of the topic for this webinar, I wanted to give a bit of an introduction for Added Education because I do see a couple of people here who are not our clients and not families that we've worked with currently. So we'll just do a little bit of intro, around 5 minutes of added education, and we'll go into the main bulk of this webinar. So yeah, Kit, I think you can go to the next slide. So yeah, just quick introduction for myself. My name is Aldi. I'm one of the relationship managers here at Added Education, mostly in charge of the Southeast Asia region. So yeah, I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia myself. As for Added Education itself, we're an education and sports consulting firm based out of Singapore. So we mainly help students and student athletes pursue their journey towards university admissions, whether it's going through the athletic route or the academic route. So we've been here for a couple of years now, and I think you can see like on the next slide as well. So Added Education was founded in 2013. We have completed 10 admission cycles with more than 2,000 students admitted into top universities abroad. So Added Education was co-founded by Akshay Maliwal and Aditi Maliwal, who went to UC Berkeley for golf and Stanford University for squash, respectively. So we help students and student athletes, like I mentioned earlier, apply through the college admission route who wants to pursue an education abroad, whether it's US, UK, or Canada. So our origins are as student athlete recruitment firm, but we have evolved over the last couple of years into a holistic education firm where 50% of our students are gifted and talented in many other ways beyond sport. So we're definitely excited to continue our company's journey beyond sports, while sports will never be forgotten and our valued university coach relationships will continue to thrive. So on the next slide, you'll see a little bit about where our clients are. It's definitely a global operation. We're proud to say that our clients have a strong presence in Asia, and we also work with a lot of families in US, UK, and Canada. And a little bit about our 11 years of impact on the next slide as well. So, you know, we've made a deep and large impact in the past 11 years. We're very proud to say we have helped over 2,000 students and student athletes across Asia with a 100% admissions rate and a total amount of 25 million plus US dollars worth of scholarship across students. So that is a very, something that we're very proud of. And on the next slide, you can see a little bit about our track record, where we usually send students and help students get into. So you know, there's a lot of the typical brand name colleges that you would know, very high caliber, high academic students go here, and we usually most of our clients end up going to these type of universities as well with the guidance that we give. So I think that's just a little bit of intro about us. Now I wanted to pass it over for the main bulk of this webinar to our partners, LCR Capital Partners. So just to give a brief intro about LCR Capital Partners, they're a private investment and advisory service firm that helps families interested in global opportunities. So the firm has helped more than 1,000 clients interested in moving to the US through the EB-5 visa program, which grants investors and their family members US green cards. So a large majority of LCR's clients base is made up of families like yourself, looking to help their children get better access to internships and career opportunities after graduation without visa constraints. So this is definitely perfect for you all who's also thinking ahead of college itself and what are the opportunities after your children you know, graduate from college. So the firm also offers, provides US loans and mortgages to international investors, as well as wealth management services through its SEC registered investment advisor, LCR Wealth. So I'll pass it over to LCR to go through the webinar. And I think, like I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of insights and information. So for anybody who has any questions, feel free to drop it in the question and answers box. So over to you guys.
Great. Thank you, Aldi. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to join you today, and we appreciate Added Education as a partner. So Nikki, let's dive into the presentation here. So this is who we are today. Nikki Jaiswal is my colleague, our Senior Director for Asia Pacific. I'm Sherman Baldwin, the CEO of LCR Capital Partners. And we have our esteemed colleague, Michael Dye, who's a US-based immigration attorney and founder of his own firm. We're very excited to be with you today and share some of our thoughts and insights that we think will be relevant for you and your families. So all of you who are on the call today are thinking big. You know, I saw Added Education's little tagline of #DreamBig. One thing that we often say with our client families is, we can help you achieve your full potential. These four people are four of, frankly, hundreds, if not thousands, of high-profile people who have been born in other countries and come to the US for education and to start their career in all walks of life, whether it's business, pure entrepreneurs, in the arts or in the sciences. Isha Ambani obviously comes from a very high-profile family, but she came, did her undergraduate work at Yale or MBA at Stanford, worked for McKinsey, and is now back home in India running a big part of the Reliance business. Elon Musk, everybody's heard of Elon. I mean, what he's doing in the world is absolutely remarkable. Founding and running several large companies. He was born and raised in South Africa and then came to the US, went to Penn, and is really having an impact on all of our lives with what he's doing, taking over Twitter, building now the most valuable automotive company on the planet, let alone what he's doing with SpaceX. So, remarkable individual. And Vihan Samat is an actor. He's done several very successful series on Netflix, an NYU grad. And Kalpana Chawla, in the sciences, was Indian born, but came to the US, went to the University of Colorado at Boulder, and then became an astronaut. So the sky is the limit. And all of you are at the beginning of this, and your families are thinking about this and thinking about going to the US. And I just enjoy talking about this slide because, there are, are you going to be the next one of these in the area that you want to pursue, whether it be the arts or sciences, an entrepreneur? Anyway, it's great fun to dream big and to think about your full potential. So next slide, please, Nikki. So as you're going down that path and thinking about all the great things you want to do and great things you want to accomplish, there are some practical realities. And there are challenges faced by international students who are coming to the US and then seeking to start their career here. Most US companies are unwilling to sponsor someone without a green card. It's a challenging thing. Michael will talk about the different paths that you can take, and certainly the H-1B path is out there, but that is a lottery and it's left to chance, and it's a very small number. And so there's also complexity. The US government, like every government, is a big bureaucracy. It's complex, it's difficult, it causes stress and distraction. And then one of the third things is that in the H-1B program, for example, companies routinely are paying people less on H-1Bs than they are people in similar roles who are residents. So there's a lot of different reasons why it's complex, challenging, and stressful. And so you want to try to navigate and find the best, most certain path to starting your career and entering, doing your education. So next slide, please. So this breaks down the challenges a little bit more in a timeline at the different ages that you might be or your children might be. Age 14 to 18, you're very focused on admissions. And one thing that's interesting is that if you're applying from the international pool, because of the massive size of the international pool, admission rates, just doing the math, are much lower. if you have a green card and are a permanent resident, then you're considered as part of the domestic applicant pool. The denominator is much smaller, and so admission rates are higher. As you're starting your career and looking for summer internships, permanent residency also enables you to avoid, not having to be sponsored. It gives you degrees of freedom and flexibility. You can work wherever you want. You could work in a startup. So looking for those summer internships and those jobs right out of college is much easier if you have a green card. OPT is a tag-along that Michael will talk about on an F1 student visa at the end of your program. And there's complexity and stress to that as well. So, it's an important and good option. And then there's the H-1B. We'll go into more detail on that in a minute. Again, stressful, left to chance, it's a lottery. And then if these things don't work out in your mid to late 20s, you may be forced to leave the country if you don't have permanent residency. So I think I'll turn it over to Michael here for this next slide to talk a little bit more in depth about the process around OPT, and then on the next couple pages about the H-1B option and how that's different from EB-5 and permanent residency. So Michael.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Sherman and Nikki and LCR Added Education for putting this together. It's great to be able to talk with you today. Just a very brief intro for our law firm. We're a full-service immigration law firm, been very active in Southeast Asia, which I think there may be some viewers or attendees from that region here today, but very active in Singapore, Indonesia, and elsewhere. We've had offices in the region for years. We have 2 other offices in the Middle East, so very active in Dubai and in Qatar and throughout the world. So these are issues that Sherman has mentioned that we've been dealing with for a long time. Some of you may be thinking, just starting off from a broad perspective, why the United States? And Sherman he presented a slide during his initial talk today about what the opportunities available in the United States and why the U.S. is different and why so many leaders have decided to engage the U.S. in their business endeavors. And it really is true. One of the statistics we always like to start with, if you're considering between the U.S. or the U.K. or Canada, Australia, some of the other options out there, well, why the U.S.? It's really the opportunity for kids to develop businesses in the future, for families to resettle and look at the opportunities that are out there. A market of more than 320 million Americans, GDP more than 23 trillion, I believe. So no matter where you settle in the United States, the opportunities really are tremendous. And our law firm is based primarily with our home office in Southern California. And if you just look at California, just very broadly and quickly here, as a market, if California were its own country, it would have an economy that's the 5th largest in the world. I believe it overtook the UK's economy last year. So if you just look at one state like that, California, and the opportunities that are out there, so it really is tremendous. So it's nice to see that a lot of the families that may be listening today and the students are looking at the US because it really is a place like no other. So to get into the immigration discussion, and we'll move into OPT, H-1B, and some of the specifics regarding that. But if you're wondering, just broadly speaking, how you come to the U.S. normally as a student, how you stay, and the opportunities to get permanent residency or to stay there. Well, the U.S. system basically gives green cards or permanent residency through one of only 2 options: through a family relationship with someone in the U.S. or through employment or investment. And those are really the only 2 ways to go all through the process and to stay permanently in the U.S. And so for most students, this happens in a way that's pretty consistent that we see over time with individuals going through this process. They generally enter the U.S. on an F1 student visa, go through their academic studies, And then they participate in what's called OPT, or optional practical training. And that basically is a period of time that the government gives the student who came in on that F1 visa a chance to use their skills that they've basically been learning over the past few years at university or college. And that time period is either 12 months or up to 36 months, depending on your field of study. So if you're studying in the STEM field, which the US is highly looking at for more individuals in those fields, science, technology, engineering, math, they give you up to 3 years to use that work experience for your benefit. And so just kind of stepping back, well, how do students practically do this? Well, again, they enter on the F1 visa, they finish their studies, they do what's called post-completion OPT, which is optional practical training. They have a job offer from an employer that's going to use them. And depending on your field, you can get 12 months or up to 3 years. And during that period of time, what the ultimate goal for most of these people is to get a job offer from a US employer. And that job offer is usually through the H-1B temporary worker category. And so you go F1 OPT to H-1B, and then you move into green card options later. So this slide right here just kind of goes, very quickly here. I know I'm taking up a bit of time, but it's good to understand in a broad perspective how this works. But this slide is very specific to OPT, how you actually go through the process. When you're in school, you apply for OPT, you get that job offer, you start your OPT experience, and then you move on to 12 months, or as you'll see in that gray circle at the bottom, an additional 24 months if you are studying in a field that's in the STEM fields. So that's basically you moving through this OPT process, and the ultimate goal is to get a permanent job offer from a US employer. So we can move on to the next slide. And that usually works through what's called H-1B, which I mentioned. And H-1B is the bread and butter temporary worker visa for the United States. And the issue with this visa is that it's very, very limited. So this visa was established many years ago when we had a different type of immigration system and the demand was very different. We weren't in such a global environment as we are today. So there are only 85,000 of these visas available per year. And if you look at the last registration period to participate in the H-1B program, there was an expression of interest in registrations that almost hit 800,000. And there are some changes going on with the H-1B program to address this heightened demand. But the bottom line to remember is that if you're going to the US, you're participating in your studies, you go through your OPT training, and maybe you can get that job offer. Maybe someone's willing to sponsor you for an H-1B visa. The chances of getting it are just very, very slim, and they're getting more slim with every year. Realistically speaking, I think you really have about a 20 to 26% chance, something like that, just depending on the specifics of getting through this. So it's not that there's a visa available ready for you. It's a lottery system. And you put your name in the hat after an employer is willing to sponsor you. And then it's just up to random selection whether you can get through that process. And so, for a lot of families and students that we deal with, they're looking at stability and going through the US education and ensuring that they have the best chance to stay there. So, if you're looking at different options, is H-1B the best pathway to try to bank on? Personally speaking, being a business immigration lawyer, I don't think so. I think if your family and you are able to pursue the EB-5 visa, which is the immigrant investor visa that Sherman had mentioned, that pathway gives you so many more benefits and stability for attempting to remain in the US. And so the differences here on this slide, the bottom framework just kind of goes through how you would participate in the H-1B process, the lottery that I mentioned, and then the goal of staying there permanently. You compare that to what you can do with EB-5 now. it's very different. So for EB-5, if you happen to be an F1 student and you're in the United States, whether or not you're doing OPT or not, you can apply for an EB-5 investor visa and then concurrently apply for work authorization and a travel document that lets you go back and forth while the EB-5 case is pending. And you don't need to worry at all about maintaining status in the United States, because just by filing that EB-5 petition and your concurrently other documents that allow you to stay there and get work authorization, you're legally allowed to stay in the US throughout the entire duration that your EB-5 case is pending. So you now don't need authorization to stay for a period of time and try to quickly find an employer that's willing to sponsor you for H-1B, or to worry about getting an offer for OPT or anything like that. As long as you've gone through the EB-5 process, you've filed, and you've got your work document, you're good to stay in the US and take the time you need to find an employer and to basically pursue your interest and not be forced into trying to go along this tight timeline that you see at the bottom there with trying to go through the H-1B program. Some of these cases here on this slide are just specific examples of individuals who have had difficulty going through this H-1B process and being able to stay in the United States. And you can read these examples, forced to quit Microsoft and return to India in 2008 when the H-1B ran out and his green card had not yet arrived. So we can get into hours of discussions on H-1B and how to maneuver through the system. But again, with each of these examples, the main thing to remember is that nothing is guaranteed when you go through this process where you rely on an employment-based offer or rely on trying to get a visa in which you're applying for in a lottery-based system. If you look at EB-5, again, very different. You don't need to compete with others who are putting their name in the hat for the H-1B lottery. You don't need to worry about your time period and your status running out, whether it's OPT or whether you've secured an H-1B. But the H-1B is up to 6 years. So if you don't have a permanent job offer with a permanent green card-based sponsor after that, you would need to leave. So you don't have to worry about any of these things if you pursue EB-5. It's just based on your investment, and the government gives you the ability to stay in the US and work with no restrictions. So I think I'll pass it over to Sherman here to kind of go into a little bit more detail about EB-5. But again, the bottom line to remember is, if you look at the simplicity basically of the EB-5 program and then compare it to what we've just talked about with trying to go through OPT, H-1B, and then finding a permanent employment-based option, just very different options.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And Mike, I really appreciate you stepping back at the beginning of your comments and offering kind of a why the U.S. perspective. And I often do that when I'm talking to audiences and presenting, and I'd like to add one or two things to the list that you added, because I think it is very important. I mean, you mentioned the world's largest economy, and that's absolutely right. And your number, I think, is is correct, $23 trillion. Another thing I point out is just the hubs of innovation around the United States, right? The Silicon Valley, there's now Silicon Hills outside of, in Austin, Texas, a tremendous amount of innovation happening there. The Research Triangle down in Raleigh-Durham area, often around biotech, healthcare, other sources of innovation. And then up in Boston is another significant innovation area. And there are lots of other hubs of innovation as well, but those four, I think, are really of global significance. Our education system, and that's obviously a big part of the reason why many of you are on this call. is second to none, and that attracts people from around the world regularly. Our entrepreneurial culture in the United States, and supported by rule of law, and what's important here is it's okay to fail in the United States. There are bankruptcy laws that protect you, and so that's why we have such an entrepreneurial culture, because the laws, are supportive of people raising capital, going out, trying new things, and if they fail, the company goes into bankruptcy. Obviously, that's a painful process, but there's not the same social stigma of failure in the United States that there are in many other countries. And many people wind up being a huge success the second, third, fourth company they try to found. So I think that's a very important cultural dynamic. Access to capital. The US has some of the most highly developed capital markets in the world and the most mature venture capital industry in the world. And lastly, this notion just of meritocracy. Many other cultures around the world have, just a different mindset. And one of the stories I love to tell about meritocracy is there's a fellow named Alberto Gonzalez who was born in South Texas. He was one of 8 children. He lived in a 2-room house with 8 or 10, his mother, father, so 10 family members. The mother and the father worked in the fields of South Texas. Anyway, Alberto was a very smart young man. He went to high school. He graduated high school. He went to the Air Force. A officer said, "You're smart. You really should go to college." He went to the Air Force Academy. Then he went to Harvard Law School. He started his law practice, and President Bush, George W. Bush, tried to recruit him to the White House to be on his staff, and he said, "No, thank you. I'm building my practice. I'm trying to care for my family." And then when George W. Bush, the second Bush president, became president, he went after Gonzalez again, and he asked him to come to the White House. He was White House counsel and then promoted to Attorney General of the United States. So the highest possible position that a lawyer could achieve in the US government. And he routinely sat in the office, in the Oval Office, advising President Bush. And you think about that, right? I know that's a little bit of a long story, but you had the son of a former president being advised by the son of 2 field workers from South Texas. I mean, it's a remarkable story, and that kind of a story can only happen in the United States. So meritocracy is a really important aspect of the United States as well. Anyway, so back to EB5. So those, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on a lot of the great points that Mike brought up, and talk a little bit more about why the U.S. So this page, it just, to Mike's point, shows how simple and straightforward EB5 is. It is a large amount of money. We appreciate that. $800,000 is invested over 5 to 7 years. So that's a significant investment. The whole point of the investment is to come into an EB5 approved project to create American jobs. Each investor needs to demonstrate, working with a firm like LCR, that their investment has created at least 10 American jobs over that period of time. There's a background check that's required. Obviously, no violations of U.S. immigration laws, criminal convictions, or history of financial fraud are permitted. There's an extensive documentation of the source of funds of that investment, which is very important. And that's work that you do with Michael. Michael Dye is a highly qualified U.S.-based immigration attorney. That's one of the key pieces of analysis that supports your application. As you go through the process, you would have 2 key relationships. One would be your immigration attorney, someone like Michael, and one would be your investment general partner of the EB5 fund that you would invest in, and you'd work with Nikki and me on that. And then the last concept that's very important is that your investment must be at risk during that period of time. So it needs to be fully invested into the American economy. Jobs are created. We demonstrate to the government those jobs have been created. And then, after that, at about the 2-year point or so, it varies based on some different things, but about the 2-year point, you get what's called your conditional green card. That has all the rights and privileges of a permanent green card. And then at about the 5 to 7-year point, you get your permanent green card through what's called the 829 petition to the USCIS. So those are the high level, fairly straightforward, simple approach to the EB-5 program. Okay, next page. So some of the key takeaways and benefits that Michael and I have mentioned. EB-5 enables you to go from an F1 visa to US work authorization in as little as 90 days. Michael talked about that. That's the concurrent filing for an adjustment of status. So if you're in the US going to school on an F1 visa and you do an EB-5 investment, you can skip all the OPT, H-1B stuff, and when you graduate, have the ability to have work authorization. EB-5 gives you control over your career and avoids the small odds, I think Michael said 20 to 26% chance of getting an H-1B visa. EB-5 makes you eligible to work for the most prestigious firms. Most of the big firms, think of Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, all the big consulting investment banks, Procter and Gamble, Google, all those companies, they really are rarely sponsoring people, and the numbers are, as Michael said, very small. And it creates optionality regarding US residency for your family. Optionality is a good thing in life, and to have the US as an option for you and your family is, we think, a very, very good thing. So let's pause here, and we're happy to open it up for questions. We have some questions on the next page, but hopefully we'll see some in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them.
All right, guys. I haven't seen any questions come through the chat just yet, so I'm going to field some questions over to Sherman and Mike anyway. But please feel free to use the Q&A, the chat function, reach out to any of us if you've got any questions on what was presented or anything else that's burning on your mind regarding visas, getting to the US, starting your studies or your career out there. Mike, would you mind just talking a little bit about the F1 process? Is it something that you would recommend getting an attorney for and being through that process that you described of the F1 to the OPT and then what follows?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at the risk of not retaining business for this type of question, I would just say, honestly speaking, to get an F1 visa, you don't need a lawyer. To do that. All around the world, people do this all the time, every year when they're starting their studies. I would say the vast majority of them do not have attorneys. It's a straightforward process in the sense that you need to, select the school that you want to study at. You need to get accepted, and you get a special form that you use for your F1 visa interview, which is called an I-20, and that basically outlines your participation in the academic program. It indicates the start and the end dates and the cost of what that program is going to be. And then you file an online visa application indicating that you'd like an F1 visa. You go to your visa interview. The consular officer will ask you some questions. Usually, they just take an interest sometimes in what you're studying. How did you select the school that you chose? And do you have the finances to actually get through this process? And so those are the main points. But do you need an attorney? No, I would say the cases where we have helped individuals that are going through F1 are if they've encountered some difficulties in their past. For example, sometimes individuals can get into some minor trouble with the law, and things like that we need to explain in greater detail. We can help the consular officer understand what happened. And there are special waivers in place to waive grounds of inadmissibility. If, for example, there was a prior overstay in the United States, an immigration violation, or maybe a small offense that happened in the applicant's home country, like shoplifting or something like that. I mean, things do happen to people. So we can usually try to work through those issues. And that's where I would say an attorney can be helpful. But a straight F1 visa, usually, most applicants can do that very much on their own.
Thank you very much, Mike. Sherman, maybe you can talk a little bit about, some of our client base, because the majority of our client base are students or parents of students that are looking to avoid these sponsorship issues. And we've got calls time and time again of the issues that students face when they are trying to get sponsored, whether it's getting that OPT, because that eventually would be, hoping to lead to the job following OPT, or when they're on an H-1B and what's going on in the eyes of the parents and that feeling that the kids are having when they're speaking to us about these issues.
Sure, happy to. Our LCR's client base is about 1,000 people now, and about 70% of those families are making this investment for the benefit of their children. Either one or two or three, it depends. The nice thing about EB-5 is that an EB-5 investment covers the full immediate family and any child under the age of 21. So if you make this investment before your children are 21, they will all get the benefit of the green card. And they really are thinking about it from the perspective not only of college admissions, but starting their professional career. And I think every family has a different perspective. Some families it's a start of the career, and then they're hoping that their child comes back to manage the family business or something like that. Some families are fully migrating to the United States. And many families take the perspective, let's say, the primary breadwinner of the family is, really does not want to get involved in U.S. taxation. That's okay. The other spouse can be the principal applicant, and that way, the primary breadwinner, the income producer spouse, doesn't need to be on the application. So you could have one spouse be the primary applicant, the children could get the benefit, and the family, the primary source of income, could be protected from U.S. taxation. So every family has a different way that they think about this, but it really all is about speed and certainty to the benefits that we've talked about, of having improved admissions rates, having improved opportunities after graduation without needing the sponsorship, without needing the H-1B, without having to go through the stress of thinking about that. So those are what many of our families think about and go through.
Thank you, Sherman. Mike, a question for you. On one of our previous slides, when you were talking through the H-1B process, there was a bit of a note on EB-2s, EB-3s. So just for everybody to understand, is a student eligible once they go H-1B into that, these outstanding ability visas, the O-1 visas, is that something that people should rely on? And what are the criteria for those types of visas in comparison to the potential ease of the EB-5 visa? Sorry, Mike, I think you're still on mute.
Here we go. Yeah, absolutely. So for getting permanent residency or a green card in the United States, I mentioned earlier that you can either do that through family or you do it through employment or investment. And Sherman has been talking about EB-5, which is the immigrant investor visa, but the other employment-based routes are also split up into categories. So you have EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, and EB-4, and that basically stands for employment-based first preference, second preference, third, fourth, and then fifth is what we've been talking about, which is the immigrant investor visa. But the other categories, EB-1, 2, 3, 4, they're very specific, and they're not just straightforward categories that you can simply find someone to easily sponsor you for. For example, just running through this very quickly, if you do your research on Google or wherever, I think it helps to understand the system overall first. So I'll run through really quickly here what these categories are. EB-1, that's people of extraordinary ability, outstanding researchers and professors, and multinational managers and executives. So if you're a young student, those categories really aren't a viable option for you. For people of extraordinary ability, we've brought over, for example, very well-known chefs from China who want to set up a restaurant in the United States. We've brought over very well-known monks from Sri Lanka. The fields are in anything, but as a young person, very difficult standards to meet. And so if you look down at the next category, EB-2, well, this is employment-based second preference, and this is for people who generally have a master's level degree or higher and a job offer from a U.S. employer. The difficult part about this is that, again, you need sponsorship from a U.S. employer, and depending upon your nationality, for example, Indians, Chinese, different nationalities have different backlogs and quotas because there are limits on the number of these types of green card options and visas that are available as well. So you may be facing a backlog that is realistically 20 plus years, 30 plus years, something like that. So it's not a straightforward option to just get someone to sponsor you for that. And then to make it through and get your green card, you may be consistently in this waiting period for a visa to become available. For the next category, if you do research and you see EB-3, well, this is basically the green card bread and butter work visa. It also requires a job offer from a U.S. employer as well. And so you would normally do this by entering the United States, as I mentioned earlier, as an F1 student. You do your OPT, you get hired by an employer for H-1B, and then that employer or another employer agrees to sponsor you for a green card under EB-3. So as you look at this, F1, OPT, H-1B, EB-3, all along the way through this journey, there are lots of variables. Employers can change their minds. The process is not straightforward. It involves lottery selection and so forth. So all of these variables are very different than what Sherman had mentioned before in terms of EB-5. That's just based on your investment. And if you have the assets and the capital to do that, you can alleviate the need to go through all of those other steps that are, OPT, H-1B, EB-3, or whatever it is.
Thank you very much. The next question I'd like both of you to give a bit of your opinion on. We talked a bit about the H-1B process and the limitations that H-1B has in terms of your salaries, your sponsorships. We didn't really talk about what happens if you want to change jobs under the H-1B and what was recently occurring with all the tech layoffs and how that kind of impacted people's decisions into EB-5 and the timeline. One of, when you lose your H-1B, what that means for you to stay and how having these considerations beforehand, Sherman, may, help the process of not getting stuck in that limbo period in terms of, switching over from an F1 or an H-1B to an EB-5 visa.
Mike, you want to start on that, Mike, and I can
Sure.
chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're stuck kind of in a situation where you enter on an F1, you do your OPT, and then you've gotten yourself luckily enough, into an H-1B status, some things, as Nikki mentioned, can happen with your job. For example, maybe your job will end. Maybe there's no need for that position anymore, and you're now stuck in this situation where you've got to find another employer. You can do a transfer. It's called an H-1B transfer to another employer. That involves the other employer sponsoring you and basically taking over your H-1B. It involves you being given an offer of employment and going through the system to basically transfer your case through USCIS to another employer. But again, this just brings up the uncertainties of relying on an employer or an employment-based approach to staying in the United States. Very different from EB-5. EB-5 is your own independent investment, not reliant on an employer or a job offer. So two totally different strategies to go through this process and to end up with the goal of getting a green card. And when you go through, as Nikki had mentioned, some of the difficulties with having an H-1B and keeping an H-1B, it's just very important to remember that H-1B is not the end of the road. H-1B is a non-immigrant visa. It's non-immigrant temporary worker visa. You need to take that last step into an employment-based green card option, which is the other ones I just mentioned, EB-2 for people master's level or higher, or EB-3. Again, requires a job offer from a U.S. employer that's willing to sponsor you. So going through all of this, just because you actually may have been lucky enough to get selected for H-1B, again, you got to make it through the next step, sponsorship through EB-2 or EB-3 from the employer. And a lot of employers just are not willing to do that for a variety of reasons. It's costly to go through the process. It takes a long time, and so forth. So I'll pass it over to Sherman. Maybe he can speak to some of the benefits again of EB-5 versus the H-1B EB-3 type of situation.
Thanks, Mike. I think you summarized it very well. It really is about, I think of it about speed and certainty. And I think EB-5 gives you those things in comparison to the OPT H-1B process. And it's really about controlling your own destiny, controlling your own start of your own career, or having it up to chance and or up to third parties, companies and other people that will have a big impact at the beginning of your career. So EB-5 gives you that speed and certainty that I think gives you a lot of peace of mind.
Thank you.
I'd love to take a question from some of the attendees. Are there any things that are on your mind?
Guys, please let us know if you have any questions that we haven't answered already.
So Sherman or Nikki, do we know what region most of the attendees today are calling in from?
The majority are between India, Indonesia, and the Philippines.
Okay.
Oh, we also have a couple from Hong Kong.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And for those of you, if you're wondering what it's like to go through EB-5 or these other processes from someone who's from Indonesia or from Hong Kong, please reach out to LCR and through them you can reach out to us as well. And we're happy to give you some specifics that are country focused and the different practices that each country, needs to, or each individual from each country needs to know. There are little nuances and differences for each person. And basically, for example, in the way you collect source of funds for EB-5, proving the government that the money was earned lawfully is really important to get through EB-5. Well, that's done differently in Indonesia compared to how it's done in India, for example. So we're happy to share some examples.
And I would add that, I mean, I imagine the attendees, we have a mix of probably students and some parents. And if you're a parent, I want to encourage you simply to reach out to Michael directly or to us directly, Nikki or myself, just to engage in a dialogue so that you can learn more. You can answer family specific, get family specific, country specific questions answered. We're happy to do that. And if you're a student, you know, I appreciate the investment is, you know, may sound daunting, may sound complicated. The best thing to do is, if you're interested in this for your own education or your own career, simply to engage your parents and recommend that they engage us in terms of just a conversation. And it's typically a lengthy process to get a family fully up to speed, understanding all the elements of the process and how it works. And we're having those conversations every day, and we welcome those conversations. So it really is about starting a conversation about what's going to be best for your family.
Sherman, we have one question that's just come in.
Okay.
And the question is, can my child apply on their own for the EB-5 if it's funded by me? So we didn't really talk about how to structure EB-5 and if it can be in the name of a child or it has to be in the parents.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. You can, I think, Michael, the typical rule of thumb is that above the age of 14, that's, if I remember right, that's typically what we do. Most of our clients have children that are, you know, 16 to 20 or so is the typical age group. We have had children as young as 14 apply. It can, the funds can be gifted, and so that's acceptable. So short answer is yes, you can approach EB-5 in that manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add, in terms of, if you're wondering how common is this, it's very common. We've been doing EB-5 for more than 15 years now, and I would say 40 to 50% of cases involve gifting. And it's usually in the scenario where a parent gifts money to the child to stay in the United States and pursue their options. So very common way to go through EB-5.
Great. We've got time for another question if anybody else has anything that we haven't answered yet.
Maybe I'll just quickly touch on the last question on the page here, and the role that our firm plays. So we're investment professionals, and we work to identify projects in the United States. Historically, they've been real estate projects. Our firm has done a series of luxury hotel and residences in Florida and Texas and California. We also have a project in Ohio. We're also now starting an exciting new strategy where we're identifying projects that are in the U.S. national interest that we believe will enable us to get expedited approval for our projects, which will mean even faster processing time for investors. So the role that we play is to identify a high quality project with strong management teams, strong strategies, strong capital structures. And we raise a fund from multiple EB-5 investors that is then loaned to that project, typically as mezzanine debt. It's attractive to the developer or to the project team because it's lower cost than typical mezzanine debt. So that's why it works for the developer. And you know, it is not, at the end of the day, a financial investment for your family. The return is very low, but it really is a strategic family decision that you want the immigration benefit and you want to get your capital back. And so our firm does extensive due diligence on the projects and the management teams to make sure that, yes, you're money is technically at risk in the project, but that it goes at minimal risk into a quality project that will create the jobs, that will get you the immigration benefit, and will get the loan repaid so that we can give you your capital back. And our firm now has taken clients all the way through the investment cycle, and we're at the point where we're starting to return capital as well, which is very exciting. So that's an important question, an important thing to understand.
Thank you, Sherman. All right, so I know we've gone over by a few minutes, so I just wanted to quickly thank all of you guys that attended. It was really nice to have you all here. We hope it was useful information. If you have any questions that we have not answered, or you'd like to talk to either Sherman, Mike, or myself more to understand this process, please reach out. Here are my contact details. Again, I'm based in Singapore. Mike and Sherman do travel out to Asia very regularly. So please do let us know how we can be of help. And thank you, Sherman, Mike, and the Added Education team for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. Good to see you, Mike. Thanks. Thank you.